Tony Will. I'm back with another fabulous episode of Women In. I have another amazing guest today, but before you find out who my guest is, let me tell you what you're listening to. Women In is a podcast that celebrates women from all walks of life and the people who lift them up. Each episode features incredible voices from my world, sharing stories that spark inspiration, challenge the status quo, and remind us that empowering women empowers everyone. This is a bold, curious, and uncensored space where disruption is welcome, forward thinking is encouraged, and change is the goal. I'm passionate about breaking down barriers, not just for us, but for my kids' generation. Whether our paths cross through the Kalamazoo Wings, Mindfulness Elevated, Tony Will Coaching, or you're part of my family or friend circle, these conversations matter. Let's dive in and celebrate the power of connection, growth, and women who are shaping our world. Welcome to my fabulous guest, Sandra Draganoiu. Bowler. I got it almost, Sandra. I almost got it.
You know,
we were walking off air.
I know it's a good one. I had to keep it when I got married. I was like, I gotta keep the last name. It's such a unique one, so it's hyphenated once I got married.
I knew I'd butcher the last name. I was halfway there, I think. But let me tell you a little bit about Sandra. She graduated Summa Cum Laude with honors distinction from Kent State University, earning a BBA in business management and a minor in international business. She joined Mavrx Sports Housing in 2020 and has since grown with the company, taking on various roles. Currently, Sandra is a senior director of inside sales and client relations. Sandra is actively involved in her community, serving as a Cleveland board member and membership chair for Women in Sports and Events, which is WISE, and a board member for the #RAKE nonprofit organization. Along with her role at Mavrx, Sandra has been an in-game host MC since 2011, working with teams across the AFL, AHL, WNBA, NHL, and most recently the NBA, MLB, and the United States Figure Skating Championships. Prior to her hosting career, Sandra toured the world as a professional figure skater with Disney on Ice.
Yeah.
She resides in Cleveland, Ohio with her husband and 3 young sons and 2 pups. Wow, I'm learning all kinds of new things already.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so honored and excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's start. I got to go to the Disney on Ice thing.
Sure.
Okay, let's start there. Tell us about, well, wait, I can't, I got too excited. Tell everyone how we met first.
So you kind of touched on it at the beginning of my bio. I currently work with Mavrx Sports Housing, and one of my colleagues, a couple of my colleagues actually met you prior to me meeting you. You interviewed the founder of our company, Nicolette, and she did your podcast briefly before this, and when you guys met, you mentioned to them that incredible Empower Her conference that you were going to have in Kalamazoo. And my colleague, Jessica Davila, who I believe you're going to be interviewing here pretty soon, she and I had the pleasure of attending that conference in Kalamazoo, and that was where I officially got to meet you. But I had heard all about you and glowing reviews and how wonderful of a human being you were, so I got to see it in person at the conference, and we've had the pleasure of talking a few times since then, and now here we are.
I know, it's so awesome. I mean, it meant so much to me that Mavrx sponsored Empower Her, and then you and Jessica came out to Kalamazoo. We are not an easy destination to get to, let alone in the middle of winter, towards the end of winter,
Yeah.
and it meant a lot. And you and I have a lot in common, which we can dive into as we talked at Empower Her. One thing we don't have in common is Disney on Ice.
True, but it's funny that it circles back to this. All of the chapters in my life have this, string just connecting them. One kind of naturally led to the other, even though they don't necessarily look like they fit perfectly. So I spent a lot of time in Kalamazoo when I was up and coming because I would always compete there. And they had a lot of competitions. So I spent a lot of time in Michigan as a whole. I'm born and raised in Cleveland. I trained in Cleveland, specifically at Lakewood under Carol Heiss Jenkins, who was an Olympic and world champion. And so she was a really foundational figure in my life growing up and had a big impact in we learned so much from sports aside from the actual sports. I learned a lot of life lessons from her, and we spent a lot of time in Michigan competing and skating. And so it was, for me, I was like, I remember this drive as I was driving up there. So yeah, it was great to be back in Kalamazoo, and it's such a close knit community. I remember that from when I was skating there, and all the coaches were really, really well bonded, so it was cool to be back there, and who doesn't love some ECHL hockey? I grew up, hockey has a really soft spot in my heart for that, and so it was great to be in a barn watching some ECHL hockey. It's a great weekend.
Yeah, we did. So Empower Conference is coming back next year. I
Nice.
needed some time afterwards to decompress because I put that together in about 100 days. And in the middle of all that, my mom passed away, as you all know. And anyways, it was like I need to figure out if I wanted to do it again. And I was
Yeah.
after I came down off of that, I was like, yeah, I definitely do. It was just awesome because I got to meet people like you and start to foster these relationships
Yeah.
and bring people to my hometown. And I love that you've been to Kalamazoo. It makes sense because we have a lot of figure skating events at Wings
Yep.
Event Center.
Yeah.
So tell me, okay, so we know you're in Disney on Ice, but
Right.
were you a specific character?
I was. It's funny in Disney they kind of match you up based on like, well, how tall are you? Does this make sense in the storyline? And it also depends on the show. Obviously, every show has its own storyline. So I specifically was in a show called Worlds of Fantasy that had Cars, The Little Mermaid, The Lion King, and Tinkerbell. So I was Ariel from The Little Mermaid. I was Nala from The Lion King. And within the Tinkerbell story, that when I was little, Tinkerbell was just a part of Peter Pan. So I love that she has her own story now. I was kind of the bad guy in that one. I was Vidya, which is the not so nice fairy. So I got to be, those were kind of our main roles. But, when you're not in your main role, they give you some breaks on the different shows. So I was also like Salsa Fish 37 in the back, and I was one of the giraffes in the circle of life. So there's all kinds of fun roles that you got to do, and candidly, sometimes some of those roles become really fun because they're not so in the limelight where you really have to like stick to the choreography and do, you're kind of like, how much can I get away with in the back left before the production director yells at me and is like, you can't pretend to play basketball in the back. Like
Work.
we would push the envelope a little bit, and she'd be like, she's like, giraffes don't do like flying peacocks down the ice. And I was like, she wanted to be a pretty giraffe. So we would try to push the envelope just far enough. And gosh, and it's so true. Your first 2 weeks of Disney, you're like, I have to get every count right, and I have to do everything perfectly. And the veterans will be like, in about a year, you're gonna see how much you can get away with without getting yelled at. And you're like, really? And then it happens. I did it for 3 years. I did a U.S. tour, and then I toured overseas in Southeast Asia and Australia. And that advice from the veterans was so true. By the end of it, we were trying to see what we could push the limit to.
Wow, what an incredible opportunity to see the country and go
Yeah.
overseas. And was it sounds exciting, but it also sounds exhausting. Was it tiring or was it energetic or both?
I think it honestly, I mean, let me paraphrase here. I was 19 to 22 when I was doing this. So obviously, energy levels at 19 are a little different. So I think, yeah, there were stretches that were really difficult, particularly our Japanese tour. We had stretches of time where I think we had like 9 days, no days off, and I think we did 27 or 28 shows in those 9 days. So those were tougher times. But generally speaking, no. I mean, you had, like you would get into a city Monday or Tuesday of the week, so we'd have a couple of days off to kind of explore and be touristy. And then we would have shows like Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, you'd have more than one show, obviously, because you're going to get more and more people in the door. So I think there were definitely stretches, like with all things, that were more challenging. But to your point, like, we were traveling the world. I think I grew so much in those years just experiencing other cultures, other people and how they communicate, and, what we maybe do and think is normal in the United States is totally different overseas. And, I really learned a lot. And as a skater, I grew so much, which really set me up for the next chapter of my life where I started coaching. And I grew so much as a performer. And just really became confident in being on the ice in those years, because you're just on the ice so much that you're like, yeah, a mistake is going to happen. It doesn't become this focal point. You kind of just learn that there's going to be mistakes and you're going to grow from them. And so that made me so much better at what I did as a performer, but also really helped me approach it as a coach and kind of helping my students and skaters through that mental hurdle of, oh my gosh, what if I make a mistake when it matters, So yeah, it was an incredible couple of years, and you become a family. I'm still in touch with like 3 or 4 of my best girlfriends that I toured with. I still see them as much as I can if our travels cross. So it's just a really beautiful chapter of life that I think I'm always going to look back fondly on.
What is it in your personality that made you feel like at that age, like, yeah, I want to travel the country, I want to go overseas? I mean, because that could be, my kids are in that age range from 18 to 23 right now.
Yeah.
And so what was it within you that you were like, I'm going to seek out this opportunity and take this chance?
Well, I think I've always been really independent. I've always wanted to travel. I've always wanted to explore. I'm always wanting to experience everything that life has to offer. My parents are immigrants from Romania. They immigrated here in 1980, and they set a really incredible example for me of doing something you believe in, even though it might be terrifying. I can't imagine being 30, having my life kind of set up, and then looking around and saying, hey, this is not going to work out for us. I don't want my children to grow up in this environment, and so we're going to leave. And in order to leave, we have to leave everything behind. So they came to the States and essentially started over at the age of 30. And so I learned from them to, go for it. Like you got one chance. You're here. You got to make the most of it. I got my work ethic from them. You're never above a job. You're never above having your best foot forward and giving it all you've got and showing up even if it's a tough day. And I think because of that too, I'm an only child, so they, interestingly enough, they were protective, but I also think they allowed me to kind of harness that independence. There was never this shelter or this, we can't let her try this or we can't let her do this. There was always if you're showing up and you're working hard, we support you, and so that kind of let me grow in that way. And I've always been that way. I was a senior in college and I was like, I don't think I want to live on campus anymore. This has been fun, but I'm ready to go. And so I got an apartment in downtown Cleveland that my dad was not impressed with. He goes, I'm sorry, you did what? I was like, I signed the lease already. I'm living in downtown Cleveland. He's like, you're 19 years old. And I was like, yeah, but way more fun downtown Cleveland than my college campus. And he was not impressed with me. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And again, that ties into how I got into my next chapter. So, I've always just kind of been that way. I kind of think things through. I weigh the options. And when I've made up my mind that that's the direction I need to go, we're getting there, right? I'm going to figure out now, now the wheels are turning, we're going to be moving in that direction. So
you started your next chapter, which was coaching. Were you
Yep.
coaching? So coaching figure skating
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
young ladies, young women.
Yeah, in the coaching world, you always kind of work as a learn to skate coach for the facility that you're at, and so in that respect, I worked with a lot of different kids. I did a lot of hockey, I did a lot of figure skating, and then for the most part, at the beginning of my career, I worked with a lot of figure skaters, and I remember from grassroots level that just were learning how to kind of waddle on the ice, up to skaters that wanted to really be competitive. And I was hired by a local rink, to be their skating director. And so I oversaw at that point the entire Learn to Skate program. We had an ice show, we had a skating school. I worked hand in hand with a hockey director who did more obviously in the hockey world. And that was kind of my life right when I got back. That was right around 2011 or so, back in the Cleveland area. And I just kind of jumped in with both feet and started coaching and learning as I was going,
Yeah. So you started at Mavrx Sports Housing back in 2020.
Yeah.
So what were you doing from 2011 to 2020?
Yeah, a lot of life in there, right? So, funny enough, I get back to Cleveland. I'm coaching, right? Bear in mind, the apartment I had on West 9th, at that point in time in downtown Cleveland when I was 19, so way back, I had made a friend who I was playing poker with. I knew nothing about poker, but I was like, sure, teach me. Sounds fun. And so through that circle, I had met somebody, now being back in Cleveland years later, who said to me, hey, the Lake Erie Monsters, the AHL team in Cleveland, are hiring, looking for an MC, a female MC. We have a male MC. We would love to have a gal that could put skates on, knows hockey, is comfortable talking on camera. And I said, sure, right? I'm always open for the opportunity, And my background, you read my bio, is not in sports broadcasting. It's not in journalism. My PR training came with Disney because we had to do a lot of PR work. But I said, sure, why not? I'll come out and audition. And that was in fall of 2012. And they hired me, and I became the MC for the Lake Erie Monsters. And it was awesome. That kicked off my hosting career that is still going to this day. But early in my career, I did a promo hit for sales. And you work in the ECHL, you got to get work on those ticket sales and getting people in the door. And so we did a promo during a game. Of course, it was staged and it was an interview, but I was interviewing at the time somebody who was our senior VP of sales for the Monsters, and I ended up marrying this man years later. So I met him, we became friends, and it was years later that we started dating. But that is what took us to Washington, D.C. He had a job offer from Monumental Sports, and we moved to D.C. And at that time, he was running an AFL team, and small budgets, you got to wear a lot of hats. So he was kind of also operating as like the GM and scouting players, right? So here we are in D.C. I'm getting my feet underneath me. I'm going to be hosting for the AFL team that he's running, and he drafts a quarterback who is Jessica Davila's husband, Nick Davila. Yeah. And so he brings him in, he brings Jess out, right? We take him out to dinner, the whole thing. And Jessica mentions, then known as Pros Sports Housing, now Mavrx Sports Housing, right? And my husband, Jeff, goes, hey, this sounds great. If you can take housing off my plate, this would be incredible. I would love to bring you guys in. And so I knew Jess and I knew Nicolette and at the time, again, Pros Sports Housing from a side view, right? Like I was coming in, I was hosting, working with the team. I knew Nick, I knew Jess, but I wasn't obviously working with them. I was at the time hosting for the AFL. I was hosting for the WNBA, the Washington Mystics at that time. I was coaching. I was now coaching in the Washington Capitals training facility. They have a beautiful training facility there. So again, I was doing learn to skate, working with private skaters, working with hockey players. And but I knew them, right? And so we were kind of rolling in tandem from about 2016 till about 2020. When I was pregnant with our first little guy, Aram, and I go, man, I'm not going to be coaching as much anymore. I'm still going to host, but it's going to kind of work around the kids and Jeff's schedule, but I still want to do something. I still want to contribute and help with our family. And Jeff suggested, hey, he's like, why don't we have a conversation with Nicolette? And Nicolette had reached out to Jeff and was like, hey, Sandra's here. Maybe she could help us with our teams on the East Coast because Mavrx is based in Phoenix.
Yep.
And so that was when they brought me out in 2020. I came on as a account executive, a sales rep, and I was basically just managing our 2 accounts that we had at the time in DC, which was our AFL teams, and we had the WNBA team. We've now grown. We also have the G League team in that market, but that was how I came on. I just started working from them in that capacity so they could have somebody on the ground in DC that could help, whatever the players needed, something units were coming on that we needed to work with. So that was how I kind of got really involved with Mavrx. But again, it's so funny how that string just ties you all the way through to get to where you are.
Oh, it is. It's fascinating because and Mavrx, formerly Pros
Yes.
Housing, is a woman, as you mentioned, Nicolette. She's a guest on Women
Yep.
in a few months back, but is a woman-owned business.
Correct.
And I don't know the percentage of women employees, but I know it's the majority.
It's like 98%. We have our vice president, John, is there, and we have someone in our field operations department, Ray. But beyond that, like all of the rest of our senior leadership team is women. The rest of our managers and entry level, it's a women owned and operated company. So yeah.
I was so impressed with when I first was introduced. It was Pros Housing.
Yep.
And I was in a governor's GM meeting that I'm actually headed to tomorrow for the week, and I was like, wow, the story of being the wife of, and that's often not thought about. Especially, I mean, we GMs, we try to think about all things when it comes to our players and this, but the families and how it's impacted picking up and moving again, especially in the minor leagues.
Yep.
I mean, so the fact that these women came together and now you're part of this to offer housing solutions, which is a big part. I mean, it's about where these players live.
Yeah.
So we want to get it right because we want them, if they're living well, then they're going to perform well,
Right.
in our case, on the ice or on the
Right.
basketball court or on the baseball
Mm-hmm.
field. So
Yeah.
what a really cool story about, truly about lifting women up and saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, Sandra would be great for this,"
Yep.
and here you are.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, so tell me like about you mentioned a little bit in that story about PR training and
Yeah.
being on camera because you're
Mm-hmm.
a host. And so for people that don't understand, if you're not in the sports world,
Sure.
um, explain what your role is at the games, and
Sure.
I'd love for you to give some tips or tricks that Disney taught you about PR, or being on camera, or being on stage that you use to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. So being an in-game MC basically means if you are a fan sitting in the building, right? You've come to the game. We are responsible for the in-game entertainment. So we are kind of like your hosts for the night. So we will be doing like a show open. We welcome everybody. We introduce if there's acts during timeouts, if there's interviews, if there's contests, if we're hyping the crowd up. We are the people that are on the mics that are getting the crowd, ready to go and kind of in the game. This is different than perhaps like the sports broadcasting if you're watching from home, right? We're not necessarily, NBC or whatever the different networks are. So we are primarily in game. The caveat to that is if you ever watch an NBA game on the NBA League Pass, and you watch a Cavs game, you'll see me. So I work for the Cleveland Cavaliers and I work for the Cleveland Guardians. And so yes, if you're streaming a game through like League Pass, you'll pick up the feed from the in arena, so you'll see us. But it's great. I mean, I've loved it. You get to connect with the fans. I love sports, so you're on the floor, you're in it. You're living and breathing the sports, and to be able to be back in my hometown and working for my hometown teams is pretty awesome. I've been really fortunate that my career kind of took me through some teams that were in their winning eras. I was in Cleveland when Lake Erie Monsters won the Calder Cup, immediately followed by the Cavs winning the 2016 championship. We then loaded the car, like I mentioned, Jeff got a job in DC. We then loaded the car and drove to DC. And in those next few years, the WNBA, the Mystics won their championship. The Capitals won the Stanley Cup. The AFL team won the Arena Bowl. So it's been pretty fun. So now that I'm back in Cleveland, I'm like, all right, Cavs, let's get it done again. Let's get a World Series for the Guardians. So it's been great. And I think, the what I've picked up along the way, my tips and tricks is I try to host as if I am talking to my best friend about the game, about the contest, about the players, whatever it is. Because you have to be relatable to 30,000 people, 20,000 people, however many it is. And so you obviously can't make a personal connection with 30,000 people. Like your connection is going to come through the camera, right? And so I try to think that I'm looking at and talking to my close friends, and I'm explaining something to them as I would be explaining it to all of these people. I also try not to take myself too seriously on camera, right? You're never going to be perfect. You're going to flub up a word sometimes. You're going to have to think quick on your feet because there's going to be some sort of technical issue that happens. And I try to remind myself, as hard as it is because I'm a performer, that it's not about me. We're here for the game. So I try to roll with it and just have a good time. And I think people can pick up on that. If you can just kind of relax and have a good time and remember that we're all here to have a good time and watch a game, that feeds through a camera and that makes you very relatable. And that also, if you have somebody with you that is maybe being interviewed or is maybe being on camera for a contest, they feed off of that energy too. So they're going to feel much calmer, more laid back, and then the whole thing is going to go better because they're going to be relaxed and having a good time and, maybe crack a joke, do something funny, and you can feed off of that, and I think that's big. I think the other thing too is I've been really fortunate that I work for organizations who, and not every organization does this, they invest in their talent. For example, the Cavaliers have brought on a group called Shine Entertainment. We have done workshops the last couple of years. They bring all the hosts together, not just from the Cavaliers, but from all of the franchise properties that they have. We have a G League team, we have an AHL team, so all those hosts come together, and we do these workshops where it's, improv, and we talk about how you're holding the mic, and how do you project, and, all the things that you don't necessarily think about, and then you get to have this time to work on those skills so that when you are doing it live and you're not going to necessarily be thinking about those things because they have to be second nature, we've spent time developing those skills. And so it's been huge to have the ability that we have to work on those things because they're willing to invest in those things. So
That's really what a great point about continued learning. And
mhm.
I want to point out, it's not like you shot out of the womb and you were like microphone in hand. Yes,
Yeah.
you're a natural performer, but that you're working on that
Yep.
skill set to feel comfortable speaking in front of 20,000, 30,000,
Yeah.
5,000, whatever people.
Yep.
And it took time. And I would imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, but when you first started, I'm sure you were a little nervous.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was really fortunate that my first job with the Lake Erie Monsters, my co-host, his name is Olivier Cedra, and Olivier is just he's a dear friend still to this day. He is now the PA announcer for the Brooklyn Nets. But he was great. He was my co-host, but then he was also a really good mentor. Like he would work with me and say, "Hey, like I need you to hold the mic." Like you hear my little one, yeah.
Yes.
He's,
In case you're all
he's
wondering,
getting
our
he's getting
little
ready for nap time, and they get cranky. I'm really fortunate. I work from home. I've been able to be around when my kiddos are little and they need me, and we have our parents around to help. So, but Olivier, back to Olivier, he was great. So he did a lot of the heavy lifting, in the beginning to kind of let me get my feet underneath me, and we would talk through hits, we would practice, we would do, whatever it is that we really needed to do, so that I could feel comfortable on that hit. Now I think I got the hang of things pretty quickly, and I think I've never gotten comfortable to say, oh, I'm good at this now. Like I'm always wanting to watch tape back, and I can email our game directors and say, hey, can I see that hit back? Like I felt like that one went really well, or I felt like that one didn't go well, and I lost where the camera was. Usually if we have a new contest, you're like, I think I lost where the camera was. I turned my back. Like I'm always analyzing what it looks like to see if the way I thought I was projecting it is the way that it was received. So Olivier worked on, and again, this is all stuff that I've learned from having a good mentor and being open to feedback, And so to this day, I'll still connect with Olivier every once in a while and say, hey, like, they're asking me to do this. This is a new thing. I don't really know how to approach it. Like, what do you think? How would you do this? So having a network that you can rely on and willing to work on it and put the time in, that's going to keep you growing, and then you're going to see the returns over the years, and you're going to get to a point where you feel really comfortable, but that doesn't happen on day 1 or day 10 or day 100, so
Exactly.
yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head. It's watching, or in my case, I listen to myself back on
Yeah.
every episode that I record
Hmm.
and getting feedback and
Yeah.
being a willingness to get coached on this stuff.
Yeah.
So to be in, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like to hear my voice, or I don't like to see myself
Yeah.
on camera. Well, if you're gonna be putting yourself out there, I really
Yeah.
encourage you to like take yourself in, because who are our hardest critics? Ourselves.
Oh my gosh, yeah. When I skated, my coach Carol that I was talking about, we had put a rule in place eventually that I was not allowed to watch the tape back of my performance or my competition for like at least 2 days, because if I would watch it immediately, even if it was a great skate, I would be like, that was bad and that was bad, and she was like, whoa. Because that's how we are. We are very self-critical, but yeah, listening to your voice back, that's a huge one, right? You're like, oh gosh, but you have to get used to doing it, and you have to be able to highlight your strengths and highlight your weaknesses and know how to work in that frame of, okay, I'm really good at this I need to prep more for, because you're going to know if you look at your script and it's a day where you're like, wow, we're hitting on everything that I'm not that comfortable with. I'm going to prep more for that game. I'm going to spend more time, running, doing those runs, and to this day, my co-hosts or the people that I work with in entertainment, they always laugh. They're like, "Oh, she's not talking to herself. She's just rehearsing. Like she is talking to herself. Just ignore her." Like because you
Yeah.
do that, you have to get comfortable with those things. And I'll say too, the more that you do something, right? We always talk about the 10,000 hours to be an expert, right? I'm nowhere near 10,000 hours, but I will say, I know from the moment I pick up my script on a game day, like if I'm on that day, or if I'm like, ooh, this is going to be a day where I really got to tune in. I really got to tap in. I'm not feeling like, the words are rolling off my tongue and I'm clever and I'm on. I have the days where I'm like, wow, there's like marbles in my mouth. I cannot get out a sentence. And so you're going to learn when you have those days, like, how do you cope with that? Like, what do you do? What tools do you have to get yourself where you need to be to still perform at the level that you expect of yourself, that the team expects of you, that the fans expect of you. And part of that is like what we talked about, right? You have mentors, you have not even mentors, but just colleagues, right? Like we have on Instagram, we have a group thread, which is all the NBA hosts, all the game day hosts in the NBA were on a thread. And we share stuff on there, right? Tips and tricks and things that work, and even just, hey, I'm not having a great day, and they'll hype each other up. So you have your network, that you can lean on to get those tools and to learn how to deal with it.
So let me ask you this,
Yeah.
because your role is public facing. So
Mhm.
I'm sure you get negative comments too.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
And ask me how I know. 'Cause- so what is your approach when you read these, or do you not read them? Like, how do you it's probably been an evolution because you've been doing this for a while. So
Mhm.
what would you say to the naysayers, and how do you handle that?
Well, this ties into something else that you and I have talked about before, and is part of kind of the life coaching. And I've shared with you that I'm coming up on 8 years of sobriety. And early in my, thank you, early in my sobriety, someone said something to me that at first didn't make sense to me. And then now it makes so much sense to me. And I apply it when I get comments like that of what other people think about me is none of my business,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
Um, and
AA meetings.
yeah. And the caveat there is that, of course, like the people in my circle that I trust, like what they think, of course, that matters. But someone who doesn't know me, someone who is behind a keyboard typing something that they just felt like typing, like, all right, great, you got it out. That's your thought. We're all moving on. At the end of the day, if you touched on it earlier, we're our harshest self critics. If I feel good about how I handled that day, that game, my job that day, how I showed up as a mom, a wife, a host, whatever it is, if I feel good about it at the end of the day, we're good. If I don't feel good about it at the end of the day, I guarantee you I feel worse because I don't feel good about it than what a comment that I read somewhere was. And I will say, for the most part, if you show up for the right reasons and you show up to do the right thing, you're going to connect with way more people in a positive way than you will negative. And if you genuinely care, people remember that and it stays with them. I have people that I have met when I hosted for the Monsters back in 2011 that I was now living in DC and was having my first and my second baby, and they were sending cards to say congratulations, right? Because I had met them and had made an impact and a connection with them. And now it's the other way. Now we're back in Cleveland, and there's fans that I have met in DC when I worked for the Capitals who reach out and want to connect and still catch up and talk about things. And so those are the things I hold on to, because those are the positive moments, and those are the things where I'm like, this is why I do this, like this is the why. This is what matters. And so yeah, someone's gonna make a comment that, I don't know, and nobody is excluded from it. Like I look up to some of the greats that hold a microphone, right? Like Doris Burke, I think, is just a goat. She's amazing. You look at Erin Andrews, and Erin Andrews famously went on Twitter, maybe on X, excuse me, it's not Twitter anymore, on X, a couple months ago, that somebody had tweeted, oh man, like even in HD, I can see her wrinkles. Obviously insinuating that if you are a woman that holds a microphone in the world of sports, yep, God forbid you see a day past 25, right? So she called him out, and she was like, hey, in HD, I'm sure that you can see him even better. I've got wrinkles. And so you're going to get it, right? You're going to get all kinds of comments about all kinds of things that you didn't ask. And so, again, what people think about me is none of my business.
And let me just say this for 1 second, because I know this isn't lost on you.
Yeah.
Would any of the men that are TV hosts, commentators, ever be talked about, brought their wrinkles brought up?
Yeah, no. And I've been fortunate that all of the male co-hosts I've ever had have been really wonderful. I've heard stories about some that are not, but mine are all really great, and they have all, at some point, made a comment in a really positive way, just acknowledging and noticing, like, the difference in preparation of, like, how we get to camera, right? And, like, what we're doing to get to camera. And I think that it is, we've made progress, for sure. I think talking about it more, I think highlighting it more is going to only help continue that progress. But yeah, and I think particularly as a woman that works outside of the WNBA, I've worked in all male sports. There is also sometimes this assumption, again, we've made progress, but there is an assumption that you don't really know about the sport that you're hosting or working for. Like, you're there because you're a pretty face on a camera, or you want to get close to the players, or you want to get close to this or that, and like none of that could be further from the truth. And I had a fan one time in DC who assumed I knew nothing about hockey, and he picked me on a day that I had the time, and I was like, you want to name the city or the mascot, and I'll tell you the NHL team. And we went through every single NHL team, and then I was like, do you want to talk about the goalies on each team, or would you like to rather talk? And he was like, I was like, we can talk about the AHL teams, we can talk about the ECHL teams. And it was funny because in that moment, this guy then became my biggest fan, and everything I talked about, everything I posted, he was like, oh yeah, and was a huge supporter. But like, also, why do we have to go through that for you to be you know what I mean? Like, just believe that if I'm there, I'm preparing, I'm showing up, I know what I'm talking about, I know about the teams. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to know everything about that sport the day that you work in that field or in that sport. But if you're a professional, you're going to prepare. You're going to know about it. We talked about this the other day when you were so kind to let me interview you for a case study. Like, integrity is showing up prepared and doing the work. When the Guardians hired me, I very candidly told them, like, I love the Guardians. I love Cleveland baseball. I couldn't tell you a ton about baseball, but 3 seasons later, I can tell you a lot about baseball. I've learned, I've studied, I've shown up. But you will always get that questioning, which my male counterparts don't have. And I guarantee you on the other side, the male co-hosts at WNBA teams, there's not female fans going up to them being like, I bet you can't name 5 players, which has happened to me, or someone says I can't name players. And again, I try to take those moments in stride. I try to handle them with grace, because at the end of the day, how I feel about that day, how I feel about how I handled that situation, that's going to stay with me longer than what that person's perception or assumption was. And so I try not to react defensively or to take it, this could be a positive moment. This could be something where this person walks away with and goes, oh, maybe I shouldn't have made that assumption. Like, look at how great the situation turned out and what I learned. If I react negatively, if I react defensively, might not work out that way,
Yeah. No, it's beautiful advice, and just in terms of what we women in sports, in varying degrees, depending on our role, we run into, and the double binds and the double standards and the hypocrisies, they're real. And yes, to your point, they're getting better, but we got a long way to go. So by talking about it openly, and other things that we're both women in sobriety, and we talk openly about that. You and I talked a lot about that together at Empower Her, and that was the first time I learned about, because I talk, as you know, very openly about it, because I want to encourage other people, not just women, but men and women, to feel comfortable in that space and know that nothing is wrong with you. Because any drug, and alcohol is a drug, I like to point this out, but it gets separated out. It's addictive to anyone. And so, anyways, that's a whole other rabbit hole. But before, I won't pull us down that one. But I do want to talk about, because we're talking so much about women, I want to know, Sandra, who the women are in your life that have made you the woman you are before me right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. First and foremost, I talked a little bit about my mom already, and that one is from the time you're a baby, right? They're by your side, and they show you life's lessons. They support you. They pick you up when you make your mistakes. My mom was the first person I called when I was finally able to say, hey, I need some help. I'm trying to figure out this whole sobriety thing, and I can't figure it out, and I need your help. And that was a really humbling phone call as someone who is, as I mentioned earlier, like, I was very independent. I was out of, I graduated high school at 17. I'm here, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. To call my mom for help was pretty humbling, but I knew that she was going to be there and walk me through it and help me and point me in the right direction. She's awesome. She's amazing. And she's taught me so much. And I think that her example of working, again, my parents came to this country very educated. They were very high in their careers when they left. They struggled with English when they got here. So they weren't just stepping right into their roles. They were starting over from, the bottom. My dad was cleaning floors. My mom was working in a factory, and they they grew themselves back up. My dad, ultimately my dad worked for NASA. He was an electrical engineer, so he worked at NASA. My mom was an international salesperson for a construction company, so she was traveling the world. She spoke multiple languages, and that came in handy for what she was doing. So again, like putting your ego to the side and just doing the work, that I learned a lot from that, and I think I credit that for almost all of my success. And then growing up, like I said, I had some really great coaches that I learned a lot from. Carol Hayes Jenkins was a big part of that. And then as I got an adult, like right now, I'm an only child. I have two incredible sister-in-laws who are just so supportive, and they are just trailblazers in their own way, and what they believe in and how they stand for it and how they show up for their families and their communities. So they are always inspiring when they have things going on and they're sharing about it. It's pretty amazing to see what they're doing. And I think from a perspective of like from a career standpoint, I've been really fortunate that every step of the way I've watched women take that next step in their careers, show up for their families and show up for their jobs, show up for themselves. And I've had those examples to kind of watch them. And I think that's a great place to talk about WISE, which is Women in Sports and Events, because, they have 25 chapters across the country. There's 6,000 members. And I think that collectively, that becomes a really important community of mentors and women in your life where you can reach out and kind of see how they're navigating some of the challenges that we face as a woman working in sports, in business, and entrepreneurship, and a woman in motherhood, right? I have three little ones, and so you're navigating those challenges. So to be able to have women that you can rely on and just vent to, hey, I'm having this kind of a day, and they just understand where you're coming from and what you mean. I think that is really important to have, and I would encourage women in their lives to look around them, and find the women that are around you and connect with them and lean into them, because they're going to provide you some really important insight, some really important perspective. Particularly, there's a woman in our company that I work with who I lovingly call her my work mom, because her kids are older, they're graduating college, and I always lean on her where I'm like, man, when your kids were little, like, how did you do this? And just talking through that. So to have that network is huge and so important.
Yeah, it is. So if you're a woman listening to this and you're in sports or events and you're not a member of WISE, look it up and see if there's a chapter near you. And if there's not, because there's not a chapter in Kalamazoo. So
right.
I'm part of the national chapter, but I'm in the Cleveland chapter. I get that information, and then Chicago and Phoenix, because I've been reaching out, and I'll be in Indy next month for the conference. And I highly encourage you. The membership's super affordable. It is a great network, and community is so important for women to, again, lift each other up, to help us get to, we all have our own goals or our own struggles, and no one's perfect, and we have a lot more in common than not. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I want to know about, because you talked about this, but what's your secret to balance, or I would say this, striking some sort of balance?
Yeah.
Because
I know, right?
your day job, you're hosting these games, which are on the evenings. You've got 3 young children. Mm-hmm. You're married. So do you have some tricks, more tricks you can tell us?
Hashtag serenity now. No.
Yeah.
I think people talk about on social media, it's like your highlight reel, right? I try to be very real on social media as well. Like the days that are not going well, there are days where you're like, here's my plan, and everything goes according to plan. And you're like, I was just telling my husband this the other day where I was like, there's days where like the kids, they just play so nicely. I'm like, oh, this is why people have like 5 kids. It's so great, And then the next day it's like, 8 a.m. And I'm like, we're not going to make it to bedtime. This is insanity. Everything's going off the rails. So I think you have to just give yourself grace. Like not every day is going to be perfect. You are not going to knock it out of the park in every role that you have to show up as every single day. And I think there's a quote that Nora Roberts said a while ago where she was talking about, you're juggling all these balls and you have to know which ones are plastic and which ones are glass, because if you let the plastic ones fall, okay, they'll bounce. The glass ones will shatter. And I think it's worth diving into that quote a little further, because she clarified that when she's talking about these balls in the air, it doesn't mean that one ball represents everything about your kids. One ball represents everything about your job, right? It's that within all of those buckets of, okay, I'm a mom, I work as a host, I am a wife, I work for Mavrx, right? All of those buckets have a billion balls in them, right? So you have to know from each bucket what is plastic and what is glass, right? Because on some days, there might be some things on the kid side that, hey, there's a lot of glass balls in that kid bucket today, and I really got to lean into that role and make sure I'm not dropping any of those. I can let these balls over here bounce today, and I'll come back and pick them up. And then that could shift, day by day. There might be a day where something in your work bucket is, hey, I really got to lean into this today. Sorry, we're not going to have time to do this, right? So I think it is a constant juggling act and time management, which again, I credit my time as a student athlete for teaching me a lot about time management and self-discipline, because I find myself doing that all the time where I'm like, okay, I've got this much time in a day. What are my glass balls today? Like, what can't I let fall? What do I got to get done? What can I push to tomorrow? And you just kind of keep doing that. And I think that's where your balance comes from, because I don't think you can realistically be like, okay, I'm going to be able to do everything perfectly as a mom, as a wife, as a host, I'm going to work out today, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do, like, of course that would be perfect, but like, no, we don't have that much time in a day. So you have to kind of really get comfortable with prioritizing. And if you're a perfectionist, you have to be okay with not getting everything on your to-do list done every day. You got to be okay with being like, all right, these 3 things didn't get done, they got to go to tomorrow, and not beat yourself up about it, because if you hold yourself to that, you're just going to drive yourself crazy, I think.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's that, that's a hard thing there's days where I struggle with that too, where I'm like, God, I get to the end of the day and I feel like I wasn't productive. But then if I actually take a minute and look at what I did, like, it was productive. It just wasn't, it didn't fit in the perfect box that I wanted it to fit in that day. And, it's a work in progress to keep leaning into that.
It's funny you mention this, because on the days I'm really, if you're not watching this, you won't see what I'm holding up, but on the days where I'm really like in the weeds, I just make a to-do list. And so this is what I have done so far, and all that. And I've got a lot more. And this is just today, but I know I won't get it all done.
Yeah.
Thank God I don't struggle with perfectionism, because I struggle with a lot of other shit, but that's not one of them. But I love that. I'm going to look I love that analogy Nora Roberts spoke about, the plastic balls and the glass balls.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Tony, it's so funny that you held up your thing. So it's gonna blur it because it's not here. But like my phone I have a to-do list of like every day, and I like time block, right? So like in these hours I've got time for this, in these hours I've got time for this, and I try to realistically be like, how much can I do in that hour, right? Like I can't do 30 things. So like, cool it, Sandra, you can't do 30 things in an hour. But it's so funny that you held that up, because I like, I'll spend a little bit of time on the weekend kind of looking at the week ahead. And I calendar block my days, and I try, again, that's where I try not to be too regimented with it, because if I'm like, oh, it has to be at 10:30 to 12:30, like that might not happen that day. That's okay. But it does at least give me some sense of organization of how to juggle everything,
Yeah.
But it's so funny that you have a list, because same.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something that's really important. Like I have mine's an old school paper list right now, but a digital, like my digital calendar, I live and die by it, and it's color coded, and and I'm still, certain days like our podcast days, certain days are office days, certain days are just all meetings, and
Right.
And there's no, like, to your point, there's no perfect way. And I look at it like this: I have a very full life, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah.
And so the days where I'm tired and I'm like, I'm not falling into bed looking all sexy, ready to finish the day off with a little sexy time with Josh. Like, no, I'm going to bed. Good night. See you later.
We have 3 small children. Like they're like the nights that we actually both end up in bed at the same time are like, I'll fall asleep on like the kids' floor, like someone's in like the armchair, like those memes you see where like the parents are like crawling out of the bedroom after like you like fell asleep on your toddler's floor and you don't know what time it is or what's happening. Like that is the chapter of life that we are in right now, and but it is, you're so grateful for that fullness. And I think this ties back to sobriety. And I even on the hard days, you're like, man, none of what I have, I would not be, I wouldn't be, I'm sure I wouldn't be married and have 3 kids. That, 100%. And just, but being able to show up as the mom, as the wife, as the daughter. You know, my parents are getting older now. They need my help in some ways. Like, I'm able to show up for them and show up at my job and show up as a friend and a coworker. And like being able to show up in that way, none of that would be possible if I wasn't, you know, really working and keeping my sobriety intact. And so I try not to lose sight of that. And I try, you know, gratitude is, we say practicing gratitude, right? It's not like a checkbox, right? You are practicing. It is an active thing. It's a verb. You're practicing gratitude. And so I try to instill that in my boys now, like really young. When I drive them to school every morning, we have about 8 minutes in the car. And they kind of roll their eyes at first, and they're little. They're 5 and 3, you know, so this will grow on them as they get older. But we, every morning in the car on the way to school, I'm like, all right, boys, what are we grateful for today? And we talk about, and then we set our tone for the day. And it's been interesting to watch because I give them my answers and they give me theirs. And their answers have kind of evolved over this past year as we've done it. Because it used to be like, I'm grateful for Spider-Man. I'm grateful for my Legos. I'm grateful for whatever. And now my oldest son, I've gotten some answers from him sometimes where he's like, I'm really grateful that when we're hungry, we have food. I'm really grateful that, you know, our bed is really warm. Like he's starting to get it. You know, he's starting to get the how precious what we have is and like how much there is to be grateful for, right? Like if you really take a moment to look at it, you can find things in your life to be grateful for, and that sets the tone for your day and your mood and how you show up. So I try to do with them because it helps me in the morning for sure, right? Especially after like the chaos of getting the kids out the door. I'm like, let's have a good conversation on the way to school.
Or in and of itself.
Yeah, right. And I think it's good for them because I think that helps your mental health. I think it helps your mood, and if you can start doing that as a regular thing when you're young, I think that's only going to carry them through as they get older. You know, when it gets harder to be like, I'm in a good mood today.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we could just keep talking, but we're going to have to end this episode right now. But if people are resonating with any of the work you're doing and want to connect with you, Sandra, where do they find you?
Yeah, for sure. We were laughing. We were talking about this earlier. Like usually somewhere in the vicinity of Cleveland, Ohio, chasing my children around, asking them to just calm down. No, so I treat my social media as, you know, my life is on my social media as far as like I don't have particularly a separate one for hosting or for Mavrx or, you know, anything like that. I just, everything I think and I believe in and I do is on my social media. So it is Sandra DBCLE. So SANDRA DBCLE. That's my Instagram, and all my stuff is linked on there. You know, Mavrx is linked on there for sports housing. All our hosting stuff is on there. So please reach out, connect. I always love meeting new people and talking and making those connections. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time to come out and be on the podcast and share your story. And I can't wait to see what's next for you. You continue to do all kinds of fantastic things, and I'm lucky to call you a friend. So
likewise, I appreciate it. I'm honored that you asked me to be on here. I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. If you all are looking to find me, I'm not hard to find either. The hockey side of my life is at kwings.com. And then anything else related to lifestyle coaching, professional development coaching, this podcast, Women in, Empower Her 2026 is all at tonywill.com. And social media, Instagram at I'm Tony Will, LinkedIn and Facebook at Tony Lentini Will. And until next time, thanks all.